at the height of the Roman Empire, two men visit the local market. Perhaps they are looking to purchase some bread and wine for the next morning. These two men would not live to see that breakfast. As they walk through the market, gray snow begins to fall from the sky, starting as a gentle flurry that quickly turns into a relentless downpour. The men look up at the nearby mountain, now cloaked in an ominous, dark cloud. The two men watch as the ash collects so heavily on buildings that they begin to collapse under the weight of the dark snow. In a nearby city directly below the mountain, temperatures soar, turning the air into a searing furnace. The heat grows so intense that people begin burning from the inside out. Their skulls fracture as their brains boil. The two men in the market are now feeling the temperatures rise in their city to an excruciating degree. The heat that destroyed the city at the base of the mountain has started to punish further cities. Any natural light that would illuminate the city in the afternoon is absent, blocked by a thick layer of ash and smoke. Many people frantically run toward the bay, some hoping for an escape by ship. Others are simply trying to find relief from the rising temperatures in the cooling waters. In either case, desperation drives them toward the water. Volcanic rocks begin to fall from the sky. Those who are not struck by the rocks eventually perish due to the extreme heat. The waters of the bay provide no relief. In a city across the bay, writer and politician Pliny the Younger watches from a safe distance as hell rains down. Pliny the Younger's uncle, the appropriately named Pliny the Elder, organizes a rescue attempt by ship and sails across the boiling bay. He dies during the attempted rescue. The two men in the market decide against running toward the bay. They elect to retreat to their home. They come to terms with the fact that they will not survive and decide to die in each other's embrace. Hopefully, they found comfort in each other, waiting for what was the end of their world. For over 1,500 years, Pliny the Younger's letters, detailing what he sees to historian Tacitus, stand as the only written evidence of this natural disaster. Centuries pass. The story of ancient Roman cities buried by a mountain becomes a legend told around campfires. During the 16th and 17th centuries, construction projects in southern Italy near Mount Vesuvius began to uncover artifacts. These artifacts eventually drew the attention of the Spanish monarchy, which began to excavate the site. In 1755, inscriptions on walls and pottery confirm that the legendary cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum have been found. We know that the two men embracing during their last moments do in fact exist. We know this because the archaeological remains left behind are not merely a crater, fragments of pottery, or tattered ruins. The hot ash buried the city and residents of Pompeii and Herculaneum. The ash acts like a mold, covering the body of the residents of the cities, preserving a snapshot of human beings in their most vulnerable moments. Pompeii and Herculaneum are both cities of legend that archaeologists later found. These cities are often held up as an example that mythical lost cities are perhaps not so mythical and are just waiting for someone to find them.
My God, what is it? I believe that we're looking at a city of the lost continent of Atlantis.
In 1882, Donnelly's Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, brought Atlantis into American pop culture. His book was a phenomenon in America. Mardi Gras was flooded with floats and costumes inspired by Donnelly's depiction of Atlantis. Baltimore's Oriole pageant in 1883 also featured an Atlantis theme. It even helped inspire the mystic Madame Blavatsky to start an entire religion. Donnelly's work still shows up in American culture today, from Disney's Atlantis: The Lost Empire to Graham Hancock's Netflix series, all borrowing heavily from Donnelly's initial ideas. What was Donnelly proposing that resonated so much with Americans in the early 1880s? Donnelly believed that Atlantis was a great society.
Atlantis has taken America by storm. Ignatius Donnelly, a white meat American babyface, has a theory that is resonating with the populace. Donnelly declares the great floods of ancient past, from the Sumerians to Gilgamesh, to the one true flood of Noah himself, are all one and the same. And that flood story? Why, it came straight from the lost city of Atlantis. But Donnelly doesn't stop there. Ladies and gentlemen, he points to pyramids. Yes, the cat's pajamas of the ancient world. They rise from the sands of Egypt in the same way they break the foliage in the jungles of Central America. How can this be? How do we explain these similarities? Donnelly says he has the answer.
As Atlantis fever began to wane in America, he attempted to write a sequel to his hit book, but it was not as well received. He made one more attempt at a hit book in 1888, arguing that the works of William Shakespeare were actually written by multiple authors. Unfortunately, that book didn't inspire any parades. It's okay that he never wrote another hit book, though, because he had his political career to fall back on. Donnelly served as a member of the U.S. House of Representatives and earned recognition as the father of American populism, fighting for an 8-hour work week and an income-based tax system. Despite Donnelly's many accomplishments, he will always be remembered as the man who brought Atlantis to America.
Excuse me?
I speak Atlantean. Toke. Subo Gimga Shakaimo.
In December of 2017, while most of us were playing Friday the 13th the game, unaware of the horrors that await us in 2020, on a site called Tumblr, a user named Pennsylvania Patriot, yes, really, was posting about a small town that supposedly disappeared into thin air.
Okay, so this is just like golf rumors, where there's basically no information available online, even less than golf rumors, in fact. Supposedly, there's a small town in Wisconsin called Doveland that just up and disappeared sometime in the late 1980s, early 1990s. One day the town was there, the next, it wasn't. Every man, woman, and child vanished into thin air.
Okay, I know what you're thinking. What the fuck are golf rumors? It's basically, from what I understand, just hearsay. Someone heard it from someone who heard it from someone's aunt. It's very likely, though, this mystery originates from the Bastion of Truth 4chan's X-board, as we found posts mentioning Doveland from around a month after the Tumblr post, talking about how posts from Doveland were being deleted and unarchived, meaning the original 4chan post that started this mystery is most likely lost. Now, the most juicy bit of this mystery, the photo. If you look up Doveland, Wisconsin on Google, this will likely be the first thing you see. But why does this photo have to be taken in this supposed lost town? Spoiler alert, it doesn't. A reverse image search brought us to a steakhouse in Los Angeles, but honestly, the photo is such low quality it could just as easily be from Australia. There is no way to know where this photo was taken, so why assume it's from a city that doesn't exist? In our view, there are 3 ways as to how this mystery started. 1, they simply lied to mess with people or create a spooky story.
How do you know someone didn't just make it up?
What? You mean just lie? You really think someone would do that? Just go on the internet and tell lies?
2, people are confusing or misremembering a real place in Wisconsin called Doveland, which is real in a small town, so it's possible people just misheard the name. 3, The original poster has somehow been transported to an alternate universe where the only things that have changed are that the Berenstain Bears are called the Berenstain Bears. The Call of Duty Black Ops 2 map Standoff has a sign where there wasn't one before, and a small town in the Midwest no longer exists. So to us, the interesting question isn't if Doveland is real, it's why do we want it to be.
Starting in 1618, the 30 Years' War lasted for, 30 years. It started as a war between Protestants and Catholics, but quickly escalated into a political royal rumble, involving nearly every major world power. Millions died. Germany was left in ruins, and Daniel Bryan didn't enter the 30 spot. In the end, treaties were signed, land was divided, and the countries agreed that maybe we shouldn't do that again. Probably. In the years that followed, Sweden decided to do some manifest destiny, expanding its territory and military might. Their navy was considered the most formidable in the world, catapulting Sweden into what's known as the Great Power Era. At the time, every European country wanted to be the next Roman Empire. One of Sweden's greatest minds during this era was Olof Rudbeck. A professor of anatomy at Uppsala University, Rudbeck helped make the school a European hub for medical education. He was one of the first to describe the lymphatic system, and he was a linguist with a deep knowledge of Nordic languages. He also contributed to accurate maps of Europe, all this making him quite popular with the Swedish aristocracy. But as Sweden's influence grew, so did its national pride. It wasn't enough for Rudbeck to be celebrated for his work in anatomy and language. He wanted to cement Sweden's place as a world power permanently. And what better way to do that than by giving the legend of Atlantis a reboot? In his book Atlantica, Rudbeck laid out his evidence that Sweden is Atlantis. First off, he argued that Norse was the root of all European languages. His basis for this was because some Norse words sounded similar to Roman ones. This is the same method that Donnelly used when selling Atlantis to America. The focus on the origin of the language was something that was used at the time to sell the idea of a superior ancient civilization of Aryan ancestry. He also noted the similarities between Swedish and Norse mythology and the mythology of the ancient Greeks and Romans. Today, we know that Swedish and Norse languages are part of the Germanic branch of the Indo-European language family, while Latin belongs to the Italic branch. In short, they're not a shared language. We also know that all myths share common themes across cultures because we're all human and have been telling similar stories over and over again for generations. Scholar Goran Haag sums it up nicely.
Rudbeck's work was a brilliant display of intellectual ambition, but it was also a product of a time when nationalist ideologies and a desire to find ancient roots were often as important as the pursuit of actual historical truth.
Which is a very polite way of saying Rudbeck's Atlantis theory was misguided bullshit. And as we'll see, this is far from the last time Atlantis will be used to blur the line between legend and nationalism. Hans Gunther was a German academic whose theories helped feed the racial ideologies of the Third Reich in its early days. Gunther was building off the early ideas of some guy who thought Sweden was Atlantis. He believed that guy was correct, that Europeans were descendants of the once great civilization. Gunther took this a lot of steps further by declaring that Atlanteans were not Swedes, but a pure Aryan race destined to rule the world. To Gunther, Atlantis was the birthplace of a superior people with white skin, blonde hair, and blue eyes. He claimed the only reason Aryans weren't on top was because subhuman races had invaded and corrupted Atlantean society. Gunther was a widely published author. He gave public lectures that were broadcast on radio, reaching a huge audience. His theories infiltrated German culture and convinced many Germans that their glorious past was stolen by outsiders. And that's where the National Socialist Party came in, ready to reclaim that lost greatness. Heinrich Himmler was one of the most powerful and terrifying men in World War II Germany, and one of the architects of the Holocaust. But behind his war crimes and genocide, he was deeply invested in Atlantis, and that can be traced back to Hans Gunther. Himmler was made head of the Ahnenerbe, the SS's scientific wing, and we cannot emphasize the quotes around scientific enough. He was charged with the task of proving Aryan supremacy through anthropology and archaeology. He oversaw expeditions to prove the Aryan connection to Atlantis. Tibet was one of their stops, because Himmler believed that Tibetans had lighter skin and distinct facial features. That, in his view, were evidence of an ancient Nordic race having mingled with their region's population after being driven from their Atlantean homeland. The Führer made fun of Himmler in private, but Gunther and Himmler's theories had captivated enough of the German populace that the German government had no problem riding that wave. Because Nazis take advantage of culture, stories, and fears, and use them to turn you against your neighbor, so that they can commit atrocities unchecked. It is important to remember, Germany had been left in ruins after World War I. The Weimar Republic was weak, struggling with rampant inflation, civil unrest, and a defeated military. Germany was a country involved in many wars, but everyone saw them defeated. So the wars that named them were marred by defeat. By the time the National Socialist Party rose to power, the country was desperate for something, anything, to restore a sense of pride and identity. The myths of Atlantis, wrapped in an appealing narrative of a glorious past, were exactly what many people wanted to believe, and provided another scapegoat for all of their problems. To many in Germany, it was the hope of regaining what they had lost. It was a joke to those in power. But their propaganda capitalized on this, and sold it as truth to their followers, over and over again. They painted a picture of a pure, superior race that was robbed from them by outsiders that were somehow less than. And enough people believed and repeated it that it felt true. Germany was defeated in World War II, but the framework had been laid out. In a time when the working class racial majority was weak and lost, is when folklore and culture and racist ideology can be weaved together to benefit the powers that be.
At 8, 7 Central.
It's here.
Mac is back in a special 2-hour thriller.
What's going on?
Richard Dean Anderson stars in his greatest adventure.
We've only got 2 days to find the treasure.
Let's find it.
An all-new MacGyver, The Lost Treasure of Atlantis, Saturday.
We have seen the ways that Atlantis has been twisted into a narrative for those in power to win. But what is the real truth behind Atlantis? There is only one historical source for this. Everything we know about the Lost City comes from two of Plato's dialogues, Timaeus and Critias. These dialogues are essentially Plato relaying a fantasy conversation between great thinkers of the time. Timaeus is set up like an intellectual dinner party, where Socrates, ever the philosopher, asks Critias, Timaeus, and Hermocrates to tell of an example of how Athens acts as a perfect state in action, a city that embodies justice, courage, and wisdom. Critias says he has just the example. He tells the group he heard it from his grandfather, who heard it from his great-grandfather's friend, Solon. Solon, in turn, got it from an Egyptian priest in the city of Sais that there was once a city called Atlantis, which means our main source for Atlantis' existence is Critias says he heard it from a guy who knows a guy who knows a guy who says this happened. According to the Egyptian priest, Athens was the greatest city of the ancient world, founded by the goddess Athena 1,000 years before even Egypt itself. Before a great deluge wiped out civilizations, Athens stood alone against an expanding empire that had previously conquered many great nations. This empire was called Atlantis. Atlantis controlled the parts of the world Athens had not yet reached, but the rich and powerful Atlanteans tried to take over the world, and the unshakable Athens was the lone superhero who could stand against the mighty but arrogant Atlantis, and Athens won the battle. Atlantis was still licking its wounds when earthquakes and floods caused the island to disappear beneath the water. The sinking of the island left a great mud shoal which made the sea impassable. The dialogue Critias tells the same story, but in greater detail. The Atlanteans, once great, had lost sight of their original virtuous intentions. Corrupted by greed and ambition, they strayed from their noble origins. The gods noticed and decided to meet and discuss what action should be taken against the corrupted Atlantis. Zeus opens the meeting by saying, "Nothing." Plato just stops writing mid-sentence. Like many artists, he got a project started, lost interest, and moved on. This is a normal process. There are a ton of half-written stories sitting in a folder on your favorite writer's computer. So, there is no conclusion, no grand reveal, just an unfinished story, sitting in the hard drive of history. Plato was using Atlantis as an allegory for Athens, which at this point in history was reeling from a war and dealing with greed and corruption in its government. Atlantis was meant to be a stand-in for what could happen to Athens if they didn't get their shit together. It's a powerful philosophical metaphor, despite the fact that Plato lost interest in finishing it. In the end, Atlantis was used here for the same thing that it's been used for centuries, to prove a political point. If you're of a certain age, you may remember seeing a picture of the two maidens of Pompeii. Two figures, frozen in an embrace and cast in volcanic ash. For decades, it was assumed that they were sisters, or perhaps a mother and daughter. Then in 2017, skeletal analysis suggested that they were both male. In 2024, DNA tests confirmed it beyond a doubt. The two maidens are the two gentlemen. It's a reminder of how much we project onto the past, shaping narratives to fit our particular worldview. We don't know who these two men were to each other, but we do know that in Pompeii, sexuality wasn't hidden. The city's walls were covered in what many history books would call fertility symbols. If we're being honest, this art was pornographic, and it was on display for all to see. In particular, male sexuality was what we might call fluid today. To the people who lived there, sex wasn't taboo. It was simply part of life. But when Pompeii was unearthed, its first archaeologists chose to look away. They locked the city's erotic artifacts in the secret cabinet of Naples, shielding the public from history that didn't fit their narrow moral worldview. This isn't to say that Pompeii was some beacon of equality. The city had slaves, and women, especially sex workers, were not treated well, to say the least. But Pompeii wasn't lost. It was ignored because it didn't tell the right story. The real ancient city of Pompeii challenges our ideas of human nature and power, for better and for worse. Pompeii is complicated. Atlantis, on the other hand, is simple. It can be whatever its storyteller wants it to be, because it never truly existed. Atlantis is a blank slate onto which a false sense of racial, moral, and a nationalistic superiority can be projected. The real story of Atlantis is not of a utopia, but of a fantasy built by manipulative men to reinforce and sell their power to a populace that loves a good story. Together, we are that populace, and we are always susceptible to this tactic. I hope that we have shown here that the truth is always a much better story.